Welcome back, and thank you for tuning in to HK Cheating Stories. We appreciate each and every one of you joining us. Where in the world are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Now, let's get the story started. My name is Nathan Cross, and for 13 years, I built an empire, not for myself, but for a family that was never truly mine. I gave them everything: my time, my loyalty, my brilliance. I turned their failing company into an $85 million powerhouse. And how did they repay me? Over dinner, my wife smiled and said, "Your wife's new husband will take over now." That was the moment I realized I wasn't part of their legacy. I was just the man they used to build it. But what they didn't know was this: I never build anything I can't take back. For 13 years, I poured everything I had into the Lancaster family company: my time, my ideas, my energy, and my very soul. While others clocked out at 5 and spent weekends on yachts or in mountain cabins, I was at the office, chasing down deals that no one believed were possible and rescuing a sinking firm one contract at a time. It wasn't just business to me, it was my legacy. When Charles Lancaster, my father-in-law, first brought me into the company, it was hemorrhaging money. Though he was respected, he was also outdated, clinging to old ways that were rapidly crumbling under the weight of his pride. I transformed that crumbling business into an empire worth $85 million. I revived his name, making it synonymous with power and prestige. I believed the company was as much mine as it was his. That belief shattered on a cool Thursday evening. We gathered around the grand dining table at the Lancaster estate, a long, polished mahogany masterpiece imported from Europe. Crystal glasses clinked as expensive wine flowed freely, and the aroma of perfectly roasted duck filled the room. On the surface, it was just another family dinner, a cherished tradition. Yet beneath the layers of laughter and conversation, I sensed something was terribly off. Seated beside me was Victoria, my wife, always impeccably dressed and poised. Her smile was flawless, her laughter measured, but tonight it felt rehearsed, too controlled. She didn't touch her wine, and her fingers drummed softly on the stem of her glass, a silent metronome keeping time with thoughts she refused to voice. Halfway through the meal, as the chatter subsided and all eyes turned toward Charles at the head of the table, Victoria spoke. Her words were smooth and precise, as if she had practiced them countless times in front of a mirror. "Your wife's new husband will take over now." The words hit me like a physical blow. There was no dramatic pause, no immediate silence. The room continued to buzz with the clinking of silverware and murmured conversations. But for me, time seemed to slow. Every syllable was a calculated strike, a clean, unambiguous betrayal, delivered with a smile. Charles merely smiled in response, as if this were a routine business decision, something to be accepted without question. His calm approval made the betrayal all the more stinging. I felt the weight of the silverware tighten in my hand, my knuckles whitening with suppressed anger. My jaw clenched, but I kept my face impassive, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break down in public. I scanned the table, noting that no one met my eyes. Not Victoria, nor her relatives, not even the longtime business partner who had once relied on my expertise during a financial crisis. Silence reigned among them, a silence that spoke volumes. In the Lancaster family, Charles's word was law, and any dissent was either unthinkable or deliberately ignored. It was then that I truly saw Victoria, not the woman I had once loved and trusted, but the obedient daughter molded by her father's iron will. She had never stood up for me, never challenged his authority. Instead, she allowed him to decide everything for her, for us. And now, with one smooth sentence, she revealed that I was no longer needed, that I was merely a placeholder in their grand design. The revelation was devastating, but it also ignited something deep within me, a cold, calculated determination. They assumed I would crumble, that I would accept this betrayal without resistance. They were wrong. I had built an empire with my own hands, transforming failure into success, and I wasn't about to let it slip away because of one moment of treachery. I set my fork down deliberately, smoothing the napkin over my lap as if to regain some semblance of control. I maintained my composure outwardly, even as every fiber of my being seethed with betrayal and hurt. The ambient clatter of the dining room, the clinking glasses, the soft murmur of conversation, contrasted sharply with the silent storm raging inside me. In that moment, I realized the truth. They saw me as replaceable. They had chosen someone younger, a man handpicked by Charles, to take my place. They had cast me aside as though I were an employee whose contract had expired. But they had forgotten one crucial detail. I was not just a worker. I was the architect of this entire empire, the man who had turned a failing venture into a multi-million-dollar powerhouse. The shock of that realization crystallized into resolve. I would not allow them to steal what was rightfully mine. Though they believed that a simple, cold declaration at dinner would mark the end of my journey, it was only the beginning of my fight to reclaim my legacy. As I sat there, every minute detail of that dinner replayed in my mind. The glint of the silverware, the indifferent expressions of my colleagues, the subtle, almost imperceptible nod from Charles. I felt the heavy burden of betrayal, but alongside it, an even heavier determination. They had underestimated me, assuming that my years of loyalty and relentless hard work meant I was too attached to be removed. They were sorely mistaken. In the silence that followed Victoria's words, I vowed silently to myself that I would not only reclaim my position, but would also exact revenge on those who dared to replace me. My heart pounded not with sorrow, but with the fierce resolve of a man betrayed, a man who knew that true power was not given but earned, and that I still held the keys to this empire. That dinner was the catalyst for everything that followed. It marked the end of one chapter in my life and the beginning of a relentless quest for justice and control. I sat there, my expression unyielding, determined to show them that the empire I had built was not theirs to take lightly. They had struck a blow against the wrong man, and in that moment, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. I didn't sleep that night. After the dinner ended, after the forced smiles and fake pleasantries had faded, I drove home in silence. The kind of silence that wraps around your throat like a noose. Victoria didn't come with me. She stayed behind at the estate, probably to celebrate the transition with her father and whatever polished replacement they had waiting in the wings. Fine. Let her. I walked into my home, loosened my tie, and sat down in my study, surrounded by the walls that had seen my dreams, my blueprints, my battles. This room had been my war room for over a decade. Tonight, it became something else, a courtroom, a vault, a furnace. I stared at the documents on my desk, neatly stacked, unassuming. But each one was a weapon, a brick in the fortress I had built around myself while they thought I was just a pawn. They underestimated me. That was their first mistake. I turned on my laptop, the screen lighting up the darkness like a match in a cave. My fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up contracts, executive agreements, legal filings. Everything I'd touched, every deal I'd overseen, was documented, and it all led back to me. Control. Not symbolic. Not honorary. Legal. Ironclad. Absolute. 62%. That's how much of the company I owned. Quietly. Strategically. Over years of reinvestment, stock options, and leveraged purchases that Charles had either signed off on blindly or underestimated entirely. They thought they were grooming an heir. I was building an empire. By 3 a.m., I was still wide awake, adrenaline keeping me sharp. My eyes scanned the shareholder agreement for the 100th time, each word burning itself deeper into my memory. Every clause, every signature, every leverage point I could pull. They thought I would walk away. I was going to walk in and burn their plans to the ground. I leaned back in my chair, exhaled slowly. I could almost hear Charles's voice from earlier. Your wife's new husband will take over now. The audacity, the smugness, the assumption that I would simply step aside like some outdated employee past his prime. No, that sentence didn't break me. It lit a fire I hadn't felt in years. I stood, grabbed my briefcase, and filled it with everything I'd need. Contracts, agreements, board reports. Then I walked to the closet, pulled out a clean suit, and hung it neatly for the morning. Today would not be the day they replaced me. Today would be the day they remembered who built the kingdom. At 8:45 a.m., I walked through the lobby of Lancaster Enterprises, not as a man defeated, but as the man who owned the ground they walked on. The air shifted when I entered. People looked up from their phones, their conversations cut short. Some nodded, others avoided eye contact. The whispers had already begun. Did you hear? Is he stepping down? Who's taking over? I didn't care. I stepped into the elevator and rode it to the top floor. As the doors opened, I walked through the executive corridor with the calm of a storm held just beneath the surface. My assistant, Danielle, looked up from her desk. She'd been with me almost 10 years, sharp, loyal, and always a step ahead. She didn't flinch. "Boardroom at noon," I said as I set my briefcase down. She nodded once. "Understood. One more thing," I added. "Call the legal team. I want them on standby." Her eyes met mine for a fraction of a second. She didn't ask why. She already knew. The war had begun. By the time I sat at my desk, I wasn't thinking about Victoria, or Charles, or whatever suited puppet they planned to parade into my office. I was thinking strategy, power, leverage. I was thinking about every deal I'd negotiated, every corner I'd pulled the company out of, and how none of it would exist without me. At exactly 9 a.m., my door opened. No knock, no announcement. Charles walked in first, imposing as always, with that air of untouchable confidence. Victoria followed, her expression unreadable, and behind them, the new husband, younger, arrogant, and already wearing the smirk of a man who thought he'd won something. Charles didn't waste time. "I assume you're aware of the transition," he said, like it was a weather report. I leaned back, steepling my fingers. Interesting choice of words. The new guy chuckled. Victoria didn't react. She just stood there like she had at dinner, cold, complicit, indifferent. "We need you to oversee the handover," Charles continued. "We expect full cooperation." I smiled faintly. "You don't have the authority to make that decision." Charles's brow twitched. Victoria's jaw tightened. The smirk on Brandon's face faltered. I reached for the remote and pressed a button. Behind me, the massive screen lit up, displaying the executive shareholder agreement. Their eyes locked on it. I stood, slowly, and turned to face them. "This document," I said, "states that any transfer of power requires approval from the majority shareholder." I let the silence settle before I delivered the blow. And that would be me. Their silence said more than words ever could. The storm had arrived, and I was at the center of it. They didn't say anything at first. Charles stared at the screen like it was written in a foreign language. Victoria's expression remained still, too still. But the new guy, Brandon, couldn't keep the mask on. His lips parted, the smirk slipping as confusion took over. 62%. Charles finally muttered. "Yes," I said, stepping around my desk, keeping my voice steady. 62%. That means I am the majority shareholder. Not you. Not Victoria. Certainly not him. I didn't even bother looking at Brandon. He wasn't worth my attention. Charles tried to recover, straightening his shoulders. "There must be a mistake. These numbers can't be right." I gestured toward the screen. "Oh, they're right. I've spent the last decade reinvesting every bonus, every stock option. While you were handing out titles and favors like candy, I was consolidating power." Victoria's voice cut through the tension, smooth as glass. "You planned this." I turned to her slowly. "I prepared for this." Her eyes narrowed. "There's a difference." "Not to me," I said. For a moment, no one moved. The silence in the room was heavy, like the weight of a dynasty cracking. I had just shattered the illusion they'd all lived in for years, that Charles was untouchable, that I was just a loyal soldier in his army. No, I was the general. And this was my battlefield. Brandon finally found his voice. "This doesn't change anything. You can't stop us from moving forward." I raised an eyebrow, amused. "Is that so?" He stepped forward, puffing his chest. "The family wants new leadership. Fresh direction." I chuckled. "You think this is about family?" I turned my gaze to Charles. "You tried to replace the man who built your empire. You thought you could erase me with a dinner announcement and a handshake. But what you failed to understand is this. While you were playing king, I was rewriting the rules of the kingdom." Charles's eyes burned with frustration. "You're making this personal." "It was personal the moment your daughter conspired with you to replace me with some smug, overconfident leech." Brandon stepped forward again. "Watch it, or what?" I snapped, finally turning to him. "You'll do what? Beat me in a boardroom you've never stepped foot in? Impress investors you've never met? Close deals you don't even understand? You're not a leader. You're a placeholder. A shiny new toy to parade around while pretending the house isn't burning." His face turned red, his fists clenched. "Good." I walked back to my desk, calm again, and picked up a file. "Here's what's going to happen," I said. "There will be no transition. No handover. No fantasy where you sit behind my desk and pretend you earned it. Victoria finally snapped. You can't do this. I looked at her for a long moment. There was no love left in my eyes. Only clarity. I already did. She flinched, barely noticeable, but I saw it. The crack in her perfect exterior. I let the silence stretch, then added, You really thought I wouldn't see this coming? That I'd be so blinded by loyalty, I wouldn't protect myself? Charles opened his mouth, but I cut him off with a raised hand. Save it. You've made your choice. Now you get to live with it. Brandon glared at me. You'll regret this. I smirked. You first. Without another word, he turned and stormed out of the office, slamming the door behind him like a child denied a toy. Charles followed seconds later, his steps slower, heavier. But Victoria, she lingered. She stood there, hands at her sides, searching my face for something. Anger? Weakness? Remorse? She found none. You knew, she finally said, her voice quiet but sharp. All along. You knew this was going to happen. I've known your father for over a decade, I replied, and I've watched you stand behind him every step of the way. I knew the day would come when he'd try to pull the rug out from under me. I just didn't expect you to help him hold the corner. Her lips pressed into a tight line. This doesn't have to be a war. I laughed, cold and hollow. It already is. She glanced once more at the screen still glowing behind me. The proof of everything they tried to steal now locked in my hands. Then she turned and walked out. The moment the door clicked shut, I exhaled and rolled my shoulders back. The first battle was over. But I knew better than to celebrate. This wasn't over. They had tried to erase me, replace me, and now they would learn what happened when you push a man who built the empire and assume he won't fight to keep it. By the time the elevator doors closed behind them, I was already back at my desk, preparing for what came next. They thought this was a victory lap. They thought I would crawl away into the shadows while Brandon warmed my chair and Victoria played queen to his puppet king. But they didn't understand who they were dealing with. I wasn't just going to defend my empire. I was going to dismantle their delusions piece by piece. I pressed the intercom. Danielle, prep the boardroom. Noon sharp. Bring the full financial summary from Q2 and the strategic forecast files. Already done, she replied, not missing a beat. That's why she'd lasted all these years. She didn't ask questions when it mattered. She executed. And Danielle, I added, have legal on standby. I want them in the building. There was a pause. You expecting resistance? I'm counting on it. I ended the call and leaned back in my chair, steepling my fingers. The next step wasn't about emotion. It was about precision. I wasn't just going to reaffirm my position to the board. I was going to carve my name into the foundation of this company so deep that not even a wrecking ball could touch it. At exactly noon, I walked into the boardroom. They were all there. 11 men and women, executives, some veterans, some new blood. They'd been with the company through its darkest days and its biggest wins. Most of them owed their careers to the strategies I had implemented. Still, I knew better than to rely on gratitude. Power is a currency. Loyalty is negotiable. As I took my seat at the head of the table, eyes followed me, some curious, others wary. I could see the questions forming on their faces, the whispers they'd heard all morning. I didn't waste time. I know some of you have heard rumors. I began, voice firm. Let's clear them up. A few of them shifted in their chairs. Yes, Charles Lancaster intended to replace me. No, that will not be happening. There it was, the ripple of surprise. A couple of them glanced at one another. One of them, Mark Delaney, the CFO, and someone I had once respected, cleared his throat. Charles has considerable influence. He's not a man who backs down easily. I met his gaze. Then he's welcome to try. But let me be clear. This company doesn't belong to Charles. It doesn't belong to the Lancaster name. It belongs to the person who built it into what it is today. My voice dropped, sharp and cold. That person is me. Silence. Not a single objection. Not yet. I let that sink in before continuing. I've been at the center of every deal, every acquisition, every expansion strategy that's taken us from barely solvent to an $85 million powerhouse. I've done the work, signed the contracts, taken the risks. And I won't allow a man who hasn't spent a single day building this empire to walk in and take credit for what I created. The room was still, save for the subtle shifting of suits and the quiet rustle of papers. If anyone in this room believes backing Charles Lancaster is the better move, speak now. I let the silence stretch. Let it thicken until it was hard to breathe. No one spoke. Good. Loyalty, I said. Softening my tone just slightly still matters to me. And those who stand with me now will be rewarded. But if anyone thinks they can play both sides, let me be perfectly clear. I don't forget betrayal. Danielle passed around folders, each one marked with projections, performance graphs, and next quarter opportunities. I saw their eyes widen at the numbers. The roadmap I'd drawn up wasn't just strong, it was visionary. By the time the meeting ended, the mood had changed. The board wasn't just uncertain anymore. They were intrigued. The smart ones were already aligning themselves with me. The cautious ones were at least realizing which direction the wind was blowing. As the others filed out, Danielle approached. "Your father-in-law called," she said quietly. "He wants to meet." I smirked. Of course he did. He'd expected compliance and gotten resistance. Now he was regrouping, probably trying to salvage whatever was left of his influence. "Tell him I'll see him tomorrow," I said. "On my terms. In my office." Danielle nodded. "Understood." She turned to leave, but I stopped her. "Danielle." She looked back. "Thank you for standing with me." She gave a small smile. I've always known where the real power was. And just like that, she was gone. I stood at the window overlooking the same city I had conquered piece by piece for this family. Now, I was preparing to defend it against them. They tried to blindside me, tried to crown someone else with my legacy. But they forgot one thing. You don't remove a king without a fight. The meeting had ended in my favor, but I wasn't naive enough to think Charles would go down without swinging. Men like him didn't retreat, they regrouped. I knew his pride was wounded, but I also knew he had allies, favors owed, hands in places I couldn't see. That's why I didn't sleep that night either. War wasn't over. It had only just begun. I arrived at the office the next morning before sunrise. The city was still cloaked in that early, bluish haze, but my mind was already racing. Danielle was waiting outside my office, punctual as always, with a thick folder clutched in her hand. Her expression was unreadable, but I could see something in her eyes, tension, and maybe a spark of satisfaction. "You were right," she said, handing me the file. "He's moving fast." I took the folder, flipping it open as I stepped inside. My office door clicked shut behind us. "How many?" I asked, eyes scanning the first page. 5 board members met with him last night. 3 more were contacted this morning. He's offering bonuses, future executive roles, even company vehicles. Desperation. Charles Lancaster was bleeding influence, and he was throwing whatever scraps he had left to the wolves, hoping someone would bite. "Anyone taking the bait?" "Not yet," she said. "But if he keeps pushing, someone will." I dropped the folder onto my desk hard. "Then we push back harder." She didn't blink. "I figured you'd say that." I looked at her. "What else did you find?" Danielle walked over and pulled out another file from her bag. This one was different, thicker, heavier. "You said to dig," she said, placing it on the desk. So I did. I opened it, and within seconds, my heart slowed and my rage sharpened. Detailed audits, internal memos, hidden expense reports, transfers disguised as business write-offs, payments routed through shell corporations, offshore accounts, names I recognized, numbers I didn't forget. Charles hadn't just tried to remove me. He'd been siphoning money from his own company for years. $14 million. Buried deep under fake consulting fees and inflated supplier costs. And he thought no one would ever notice. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. He wasn't just pushing me out. He was covering his tracks. Danielle nodded. He didn't expect anyone to be watching that closely. I tapped the desk with my fingers. "How much does the board know?" "Nothing," she replied. "Not yet." A slow smile spread across my face. "Then it's time they learned." She tilted her head. "You want to expose him?" "No," I said. "I want to destroy him." There's a difference. I spent the next 2 hours reviewing every page, highlighting key dates, mapping out the timeline of the embezzlement. The deeper I went, the more I realized how long this had been going on. Charles hadn't built a legacy, he'd built a facade. And behind it, rot, corruption, arrogance. By 11 a.m., I was ready. "Call another board meeting," I told Danielle. "Today." She didn't ask why. She already knew. At noon, I walked into the boardroom for the second time in 2 days. The air was different now, charged, uneasy. Word had gotten out that something was happening. I saw it in the eyes of the executives, the tension in their shoulders, the uncertainty in their silence. Charles was already seated at the far end of the table when I entered. He didn't look at me. He didn't need to. He was confident. Too confident. He believed the worst had passed. He was wrong. I took my seat at the head, let the silence linger, then opened the folder in front of me. I called this meeting to discuss the future of Hastings Enterprises, I said. But before we do that, we need to deal with the past. I stood and began passing out copies of the audit file, one by one, watching their expressions shift as they scanned the pages. These are financial records, I said, voice calm but sharp. They show unauthorized transfers, mismanaged funds, and $14 million siphoned into offshore accounts, all tied to Charles Lancaster. A wave of stunned silence swept the room. Murmurs followed. Eyes darted to Charles. He stayed quiet at first. Then he laughed, low, dismissive. This is nonsense. I walked back to my seat. Is it? Because page 73 has a full breakdown of a Cayman Islands account opened in your name. Funds pulled directly from corporate profits. His face darkened. This is a family matter, he snapped. No, I said, cutting him off. This is a corporate matter. And as the majority shareholder, it is my duty to protect this company from corruption, no matter where it comes from. He glared at me, jaw tight, fists clenched. What do you want? He growled. I stared him dead in the eye. Your resignation. Effective immediately. The room went dead silent. After a long pause, he exhaled, then nodded. Fine, but I wasn't finished. And your shares, I added. Transfer them to me. He froze. You're pushing it. No, I said coldly. I'm ending it. He looked down at the table, then slowly slid the file back toward me. His voice was barely a whisper. You really are ruthless. I smiled. I learned from the best. By the time Charles walked out of that boardroom, stripped of his title and humiliated in front of the very people who used to bow to him, I knew the tide had turned. The empire he spent decades building, on image, intimidation, and quiet corruption, was no longer his. It was mine now. And the best part? He handed it to me himself. I didn't celebrate. Not yet. I sat in my office, lights dimmed, the city buzzing beyond the glass walls. Danielle entered without knocking, a tablet in hand. You made every front page, she said, setting it down. They're calling it the corporate coup of the decade. I scrolled through the headlines. Hastings shakeup. Chairman resigns amid financial scandal. The rise of Nathan Cross, from son-in-law to sole power. $85 million empire reclaimed in a single move. Some call me a genius. Others call me ruthless. They were both right. Danielle stood there a moment longer. There's something else. Victoria, she's been calling. Repeatedly. I didn't respond. I had expected it. In fact, I was surprised it took her this long. She also came by the building. Security turned her away. I exhaled slowly. She's not used to being ignored. Danielle gave a faint smile, then turned to leave. I stared down at the screen for a long moment, watching the headlines scroll. They had tried to erase me, replace me, undermine everything I'd built. Now the only name anyone was talking about was mine. But power wasn't just about victory, it was about defense. And I knew Charles. I knew he wouldn't slink away into quiet retirement. He would regroup, scheme, plot his return. Men like him didn't vanish. They bled influence until someone gave them a reason to matter again. I wasn't about to give him that reason. The next morning, I arrived at the office before the sun had risen. Danielle was already there, scanning her tablet, a fresh folder in her hands. They're rallying, she said without looking up. How many? 3 board members had dinner with him last night. 2 more were seen meeting him at that private club downtown. He's trying to frame your takeover as impulsive. Reckless. I smirked. Predictable. Desperate. She nodded. Desperate men do dangerous things. I tapped the edge of the desk. What do we have on the board members who are still wavering? She flipped the folder open, revealing files on each one. 2 have nothing. Clean records, neutral positions. But the other 3? Offshore accounts. Side deals. One of them has an unreported conflict of interest in a recent merger. I leaned forward, a cold grin creeping across my face. Leverage. Danielle nodded. If they try to vote against you, we squeeze. Good. Let them know where the real power lies. At exactly 3 p.m., the office phone rang. I picked it up without hesitation. I was wondering when you'd call, I said. You're making a mistake. Charles's voice came through, calm but tight. You keep saying that, I replied. But I'm still here. And you're not. This isn't over. For you it is. Silence stretched between us, heavy and final. Enjoy your retirement. I said. Then I hung up. That night, I returned home and found a message waiting for me. It was from her. I miss you. I stared at the words for a long moment. Then I deleted the message. She had chosen her side, and I had won. I stepped out onto my balcony, the city glowing below. For the first time in years, I was exactly where I was meant to be. Untouchable, unstoppable, free. But I also knew the game wasn't over. Power never truly rests. It shifts, evolves. It must be defended at all costs. And now that I had taken the throne, I would burn the whole kingdom down before I let anyone steal it again. The next morning, Danielle handed me another file. Victoria's been making calls, she said. Trying to meet with investors, board members, anyone who'll give her an audience. Anyone biting? Not yet, she said. But she's persistent. Let her be, I replied. Let her flail. Let her wonder if I'll open the door. Danielle studied me for a moment, then nodded. She made her choice. She did, I said, turning my chair toward the window. Now she can live with it. Charles had been dethroned. Victoria cast aside. Their golden boy, Brandon, gone before he ever sat down. And me? I wasn't just defending my legacy. I was expanding it. It was nearly midnight when I received the next message from her. We need to talk. I didn't respond. At 12:30, another one came in. Please. That one made me pause. Not because I felt anything for her. That part of me had been burned out the moment she sat across from me at that dinner table, letting her father announce my replacement like I was yesterday's trash. No. I paused because I recognized desperation. And desperate people are unpredictable. The next day, I arrived at the office just before 6 a.m. I needed clarity, focus, something that came easier in the silence before the city woke. Danielle was already there. As expected, coffee in one hand, tablet in the other. She was seen leaving Charles's estate late last night, she said, without even looking up. Word is, she's trying to distance herself from him. I smirked. Of course she is. The ship's sinking. She just doesn't want to go down with it. Danielle finally glanced up. You think she's doing it for you? No, I said, chuckling bitterly. She's doing it for herself. She always has. Danielle studied me for a second, then nodded, returning to her screen. She didn't say what I knew she was thinking. She's not done. Not yet. By mid-afternoon, I had locked down 2 new strategic partnerships and secured a line of private capital to fuel our international expansion. While they were busy trying to recover from their loss, I was building something they could never catch up to. At exactly 5 p.m., as I was heading toward the elevator, I saw her. Victoria, standing in the lobby like she owned the place. Her posture was perfect, her gray dress tailored, her face polished to that practiced neutrality I once found elegant. Now it just looked hollow. She spotted me and stepped forward. Nathan. I didn't break stride, but something made me stop. Maybe curiosity, maybe the desire to watch her squirm. She took it as permission. You finally decided to see me, she said softly. No, I replied. I just didn't feel like pretending you don't exist. She flinched, just slightly, but recovered. Can we talk? In private. I studied her, then turned toward the side exit. I didn't say a word. She followed. Outside, the night air was crisp, the lights of the city reflecting off the glass tower behind us. The empire I now fully controlled. She stood a few feet away, arms crossed, uncertain for the first time in a long time. I didn't want this, she began. I laughed, shaking my head. You stood by and watched it happen. I didn't know how to stop it. You didn't try. That shut her up. Silence stretched between us. I made a mistake, she finally admitted, her voice softer now. I thought I was doing what was best, following my father's lead. I didn't see how far he'd go. I didn't see what I was losing. I looked at her, really looked at her. And for a second, I saw the woman I once married. The one I once believed would fight beside me, not against me. But that woman had vanished long before the first knife was ever drawn. I just want to know, she said, if there's any way to fix this. I exhaled slowly, shoving my hands in my coat pockets. You don't get to fix this, I said evenly. You don't get to rewrite the ending. Her eyes filled, not with tears, but with frustration, regret, maybe even grief. I thought you loved me. I did, I said. Once. But you threw that away. You watched them try to erase me and said nothing. She looked away, lips pressed tight. Do you really hate me that much? She whispered. I shook my head. No. I just don't care anymore. And that was worse. That was the real punishment. Indifference. The one thing she never expected from me. She stood there, mouth slightly open, as if she wanted to say something else. But in the end, she didn't. She just nodded once, turned, and walked away into the night. She didn't look back. Neither did I. When I got back to my office, Danielle glanced up from her tablet. She's gone. She won't be back. Danielle nodded, then went back to work without a word. And me? I sat down, rolled up my sleeves, and dove back into strategy reports and acquisition proposals. There were no distractions anymore. No ghosts from the past trying to claw their way back into my life. Victoria had made her choice. Now, she had to live with it. And I had work to do. A week passed. The headlines kept coming, the calls kept ringing, and the world outside couldn't stop talking about how Nathan Cross had dismantled a dynasty in less than a month. But I wasn't interested in the noise. While reporters clamored for interviews and investors sent congratulations masked as curiosity, I stayed focused. Hastings Enterprises was no longer just a company. It was my legacy, and I had no intention of letting it stagnate like Charles had for years. Expansion, power, control. That was the agenda now. At 7 a.m. sharp, I walked into the boardroom, flanked by Danielle and 3 of my top strategists. The remaining board members, those who had watched the power shift and wisely chosen the winning side, were already seated. Their postures had changed. Less guarded, more attentive. They weren't just waiting to be told what came next. They were waiting to follow. "We're done playing defense," I said, standing at the head of the table. "Hastings Enterprises will no longer be content with holding ground. We're going global." I laid out our strategy: aggressive international acquisitions, restructuring stagnant departments, removing deadweight. We would no longer react to markets. We would dominate them. Some board members nodded. A few exchanged looks, but none objected. They knew better now. As the meeting ended, Danielle leaned in. "Your ex-wife's been calling again." I didn't even blink. "Ignore it. She's been asking board members for meetings, trying to regain relevance. She made her choice," I said coldly. "Now she can live with it." Danielle didn't argue. She never did. She understood me better than most. But she wasn't the only one making moves. That afternoon, a notification popped up on my desk. Charles Lancaster had requested a meeting. Officially. Through lawyers. Formally worded. Final. He wasn't done trying. I looked at the request, then slowly set the tablet down. "Schedule it," I said. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. in my office." Danielle raised an eyebrow. "You sure you want to see him again?" "Oh, I'm sure. I want to watch him realize, face to face, that he has nothing left to bargain with." The next morning, he arrived right on time. Not a second early, not a second late. Still dressed in one of his tailored suits, but it hung heavier on his shoulders now. The sharpness in his eyes was dulled. The arrogance was dimmed. He sat without waiting to be offered a seat. But there was no power in the gesture anymore. Just habit. "I won't waste your time," he said. "I know what you think of me." I said nothing. Just waited. "You believe it's over. You believe I'm done. But power doesn't disappear. It shifts. And someday, someone younger, hungrier, they'll do to you what you did to me." I finally leaned forward. "You're right." He blinked. "Power does shift. That's why I built mine on leverage, not bloodlines. Strategy, not favoritism. I didn't inherit anything. I earned it." He stared at me, silent. "So why are you here, Charles?" He took a breath. "I want a seat at the table. I'm not asking for control. Just a place. A stake." I laughed, shaking my head. "You had a seat. You had the whole damn table. And you tried to hand it off to someone else like I was nothing." "I made a mistake," he said, voice low. "No," I snapped. "You made a decision. A calculated one. You tried to erase me. Now you get to live with the fact that I've erased you." His fists clenched, knuckles white. "Let me buy back in. Name your price." "There is no price." His jaw tightened. "You're shutting me out completely?" "You shut yourself out." He stood abruptly, knocking the chair back. "Enjoy this while it lasts," he hissed. "Because one day, you'll look around and realize you're alone." I stood, calmly buttoning my jacket. Alone is better than betrayed. He stared at me for one final moment, desperate, furious, defeated, then turned and walked out of my office for the last time. When the door shut, I felt nothing. No satisfaction. No anger. Just peace. Later that evening, I stood by the window. The city sprawled out below, glittering with possibility. Hastings Enterprises was mine now, in name, in power, in vision. I had built something no one could steal from me. Not Charles. Not Victoria. Not anyone. Danielle stepped into the room, calm as always. "It's done," she said. "He's resigned from all remaining boards. Investors have cut ties. He's finished." I nodded. "Good." He was the last loose thread. She hesitated before asking, "What now?" I turned to her, a small smile on my lips. "Now," I said, "I make sure no one ever forgets who built this empire." And with that, I turned back to the skyline. The war was over. The kingdom was mine, and I would rule it, alone, unchallenged, and unshakable. Now, as I stand alone at the top, no more betrayals left to uncover, no more illusions to shatter. I've come to understand something deeper. True power isn't found in titles, reputation, or even relationships. It's found in preparation, in vision, in the ability to remain standing when everyone else walks away. I used to believe that loyalty would be rewarded, that family would never turn on you. But the truth is, sometimes, the people closest to you will be the first to betray you, if it serves their purpose. If there's one lesson I'd pass on, especially to those who've spent a lifetime working hard and trusting deeply, it's this: never hand over your destiny to someone else. Always keep a way out. Always protect what you've built. And never confuse comfort with security. Age brings wisdom, and wisdom is the one thing no one can steal from you. A true legacy isn't something you inherit. It's something you build with your own hands. And no one can take it from you, unless you let them.